Okay? Okay. So thank you very much, Clive, for this kind introduction. And thank you very much to the Gibraltar Museum and to the wonderful team that has organized this meeting for the opportunity to share my work with you. So as Clive already said, I'm going to talk to you about the making of this series of 5 large format digital paintings that represent what we consider relevant aspects of the life of the Neanderthals from Gibraltar. Before we go into details of how these images were created, I'm going to have a rather lengthy introductory section because in my experience, this kind of discipline of paleontological art is almost universally unknown. So it's like, when I get interviewed by these fantastic one more take people, the usual thing is it's not like you are an expert on genomics and you get asked about the recent developments. No, the question is always, excuse me, what is it again that you do? So when I explain it, it's, okay, thank you, time is over, next interview. So I got used to explain what I do. So, okay. So paleontological art, paleoanthropological art, is a combination of art and science with the purpose of creating attractive and hopefully scientifically accurate renditions of past life, of things that are vanished. We try to make them visible. And in terms of art, this implies a combination of many techniques. So in this sort of collage I have created from my images over the years of reconstructing Homo antecessor, this species discovered at Atapuerca. You can see, like from left to right, like from the more traditional, like pencil drawing, conventional photography, to the more technological things like 3D computer modeling. Then I use these 3D renders as a template to create 2D digital art. So, okay, it's a whole range of techniques, but all, as part of a method that philosophically we could say that it's just logic, just common sense. It would look like common sense to any of us in the 21st century that we can use the osteology, the preserved anatomy of fossils, as a starting point to reconstruct their life appearance. But for the vast majority of time of human history, such a thing was unthinkable. Because for one thing, even the concept of the existence of extinct species didn't exist until a couple of centuries ago. So for all those millennia, people stumbled upon fossils. But what did they make of them? So if people came across a fossilized bone of a vertebrate, they would interpret it as the remains of modern species or as the remains of mythological creatures like dragons, unicorns. And that takes me to this reconstruction of a unicorn, which you could take as the work of some ignorant person back in the Middle Ages. But in fact, it was created in the late 17th century by a trained scientist. This was Professor Otto von Guericke, a German physicist. And this is one interesting piece of information. The other interesting piece of information is what was the raw material for this reconstruction. Professor von Guericke worked from a sample of late Pleistocene mammals from a cave in Germany near his home. And these animals, all of them, have very close relatives living in the present. So if Professor von Guericke had been working with dinosaur bones, you could more easily understand his perplexity. But here you had woolly mammoth, you had bison, you had aurochs. So all Professor von Guericke had to do was to go to his local butcher and show him the bones. He would say, this is a cow. There's nothing mythological about this. So how could a well-educated person not see such clear evidence? And so this is one of the main topics of my talk. Cultural preconceptions. They create a filter, a veil, that render us incapable of seeing the evidence. So these things wouldn't change for yet another century. Then, with the advent of this relevant person, Baron Georges Cuvier, things changed a lot in a very short time. Cuvier almost single-handedly created modern vertebrate paleontology. And while he was at it, he also created comparative anatomy. And in his spare time, he created the concept of extinct species. So he created like the right conditions for the appearance of a method of reconstruction like we use today. And while he was at it, he was not only a brilliant scientist, he was a very capable draftsman too. So he invented the reconstruction method. He created these amazing sketches, which for me are comparable to Leonardo da Vinci's, because it's not some artist working, under the instructions of a scientist. No, he was using his hand and his pencil to give shape to his own observations, first-hand observations. So he made these reconstructions of the species that he was describing for science for the first time. And you would think, wow, Monsieur Cuvier, you have to be proud of your work. But he wasn't. He was embarrassed. So he never published these sketches. They were discovered at the Natural History Museum in Paris many years later. And so why would he be embarrassed? Well, this is something I'm very familiar with. People don't think this is serious science. This is, it's a flight of fantasy. We can never know. But hey, if somebody knew, that was Cuvier. So it took another century for this method to be independently recreated by Charles Knight in the United States with the help of some of the better brains of vertebrate paleontology. So what is the method? I think the beauty is in the simplicity. So it's nothing that fanciful. I mean, it's just, I simplified it in these 3 steps. This example is my reconstruction of a saber-toothed cat. They are actually my pet group, which I prefer to work in. Nothing against hominins. So this is Homotherium, a saber-toothed cat that happened to coexist with many hominin species. And so the first step, you look at the drawing on top, is to assemble the separate bones into a drawing of a lifelike postured skeleton. And for that, your guide will be the shape of the articulations, the joint areas of the bones, which tell you what is the range of flexion and extension. So what would be the approximate angle between each bone and the next one? The second step is what I call dissection in reverse. When we dissect our animals, we go from the outside in. So we cut, we separate each muscle, and we track it to its attachment area in the bones. With the fossils, we do the opposite. So we identify those attachment areas in the bones, and from there we start to dress the bones with successive layers from the inside out. And when we have this reconstruction of the muscle mass, we go to the third and final stage, which is to add the external tissues, skin, fur, feathers, scales, and this, of course, is the most speculative part of the process, because in 99% and more of the fossil record, we have no direct evidence. We would need a miraculous preservation, which we now and then have, but generally it's just informed speculation. So this was essentially the basic method of anatomical reconstruction, but at the same time, in more or less parallel evolution of the methodology, anthropologists were developing another method, which I call the soft tissue thickness method, and it was designed for the more specific purpose of reconstructing faces, human faces. So what these early anthropologists did was rather macabre, a little bit sinister. They would go into the morgue and use needles to pierce the soft tissue and measure the thickness on top of the bone. So they would do this procedure with dozens, hundreds of cadavers. And they accumulate a database. So then they could do the reverse thing, and using the bare skull of a person, apply this thickness of soft tissue and reconstruct the hypothetical face. So it's not German, it's Austrian anatomist Wilhelm Hies applied this method in the 19th century to reconstruct the face of the musician Johann Sebastian Bach. And the results were so similar to the existing portraits of the musician that it contributed to create a very positive look at this methodology. So anthropologists were only expected to use it to reconstruct fossil hominins as soon as complete skulls were discovered. So an early example is this reconstruction of a Neanderthal by Italian sculptor Norberto Montebuco. And it shows you that even if you follow this methodology, I'm sure that this sculpture is okay in terms of the general proportions of the skull, and it's okay in terms of the depth of soft tissue. But it has so many anatomical errors that you wouldn't know where to begin. So results like this meant that some clever anthropologists thought that they had to develop some control. So a mixed method emerged where people would combine the thickness, soft tissue thickness method with the good old reverse dissection, so that more attention was given to particular anatomical features. So forensic artists are using this methodology today to reconstruct individuals, murder victims, and it works. It leads to some positive identifications, and it allows people like Richard Neve to recreate historical characters. So this is essentially the method that I use. And so a couple of examples from my previous experience. This is a reconstruction I did as part of a National Geographic assignment. I was asked to create the first reconstruction ever of one of the best skulls from Dmanisi in Georgia. And so I was sent this beautiful cast of a pristine skull without any deformation. And one thing that called my attention was the big canine. The canine teeth is big relative to skull size. So I thought, okay, I would reconstruct this as a young male. And some people think it is a female. So I think now with these new developments, these technological methods, I hope we will soon be able to know if this particular individual was male or female. But anyway, I used this mixed method. And you see one interesting aspect is the nose. When you look at the maxilla and the nasals of the Dmanisi hominids, you have no doubt that their external nose was flat, almost ape-like, which gives it a primitive look in our eyes. So when the National Geographic editors saw these preliminary images, they asked me to create a beast-like Homo georgicus, or whatever you call it. And I was reluctant. But the art editor told me, okay, you are in Spain. Drink a lot of red wine. Let the beast come out of you. Okay, let's do that. So I had this menacing hominid, like, showing its huge, serious canine teeth, like, beware, don't mess up with me. And they loved it. So it even made it to the cover of the magazine. So it was seen by millions of people around the planet. And wow, the Dmanisi hominids were mean. This is almost a werewolf. And it's the irony of things that years later, a new discovery was made in Dmanisi of another complete skull, which didn't have serious canines, didn't have serious incisors or premolars. It was toothless. The poor thing was old and had lost all of its teeth, save one. And so this gave us a very different, shed a different light on the Dmanisi hominins, because they were caring for their elders. They had been feeding this poor guy for years. So maybe it's not the werewolf after all. But still, these things make you humble. But still, what I like is the sense of security I get from the anatomy. But I feel that, okay, I may have been wrong in some of the cultural preconceptions, but I hope the anatomy still holds. So we come closer to Neanderthal planet now. This is one of my many reconstructions of Atapuerca hominins. So this is Cima de los Huesos. And one of the things I do, I have more of a classic than a Baroque inclination in terms of art. So I try to create like, canons, like a canon of what a Cima de los Huesos ideal hominin would be. So for skull 5, this adult skull over here, I sort of cured it of its diseases, because this poor guy had a, very inflamed maxilla. It had problems with his teeth and the ear. So I invented a fully healthy skull 5, and it served me to create this reconstruction of an adult Cima de los Huesos hominin. Then I combined a couple of adolescent skulls, partial skulls. I made a Frankenstein of the two of them to show this portrait of a younger hominin. So, this is a kind of interaction between data and art, which I'm hoping that will sort of protect honest reconstructions from getting too easily dated. So, talking about dated reconstructions, it's interesting to see how the iconography of Neanderthals has changed over the years. And I have seen this reconstruction for ages, but only last week, as I was preparing this presentation, I learned that this is an artist called Frank Kupka, who did this for London Illustrated News or something like that back in 1909. And again, it's a little bit like von Guericke's unicorn. Is this the result of some, ignorant person? No. This was a very capable artist, and this reconstruction, to my understanding, was approved by French anatomist Marcelin Boule, who had described the Chapelle aux Saints skeleton. And my other love is big cats, and Marcelin Boule did some brilliant descriptions of cave lions, so I respect his work very much. But he thought this was a good representation of Neanderthals. Couldn't he see that he was studying an old person with arthritis? It's strange. So again, we are dealing with these glasses that we wear. And so now that is evolving, and I show you now a few of my previous Neanderthal reconstructions. I, try to be as faithful to anatomy as I can, and even if we now know that they were much more similar to us, they were not ape-like at all, but I'm still struck by their physicality. They were, it must have been an impressive thing to meet a Neanderthal in the flesh. But still, I on purpose gave my male on the right side that thinker pose. Because, they must have spent quite some time thinking ahead of what they would do just to survive. And then I was asked to do this reconstruction of Neanderthal daily life in the mountains of northern Spain. So again, it's a more, almost idyllic view of Neanderthal life. But I guess even if their lives were short, probably violent, there have to be happy times in their lives. So why not? Again, I admit I have my own glasses. So we all have them. And there is this, this was another museum commission. So it's actually a funeral, but you can see the body because this is a diorama background. So the body would be here in the museum exhibit. And again, it's, I try to be faithful to the anatomy and yet, reflect a more modern view of the Neanderthals. So I incorporated these findings about Neanderthals probably cooking their vegetables, like, rather than this mindless munching of mammoth flesh all the time. And again, I tried to bring together this evidence of ochre and pigment use, maybe for body decoration, with these perforated seashells. So it's like, the area where I'm most comfortable is anatomy, but it is good to incorporate, data from archaeology and culture to dress up these Neanderthals. But when it comes to the core anatomical basis of the reconstructions, my methods have evolved as well. This was one of my earliest reconstructions of Neanderthals. I did for Juan Luis Arzuaga's book, La especie elegida, The Chosen Species, like more than 20 years ago. So I was low-tech back then. It was the good old photography and measurements of the fossils and of the casts, and good old pencil drawing to create this sequence, this reverse dissection. Nowadays, I take advantage of digital technology. So already a few years ago, I created this 3D model. Ironically, I did it by hand. So I imported several photographs of Neanderthal skulls to the 3D software, use them as reference to create this model, which now is very useful because I can render it in any angle. I can light it as I wish in the 3D software, and I have this external tissue, superficial tissue outline around it. Shows a group of Neanderthals scavenging beached seal. There in the distance, you see a beach dolphin. And so this is still my private sketching. I do some particular studies of the individual characters. Then I give it a more recognizable shape, and then, okay, this is what I send to my colleagues. We get some comments coming and going, and then I proceed to make all this mixture of techniques. I import some photographs from the field visits that we made. So this is an actual Gibraltar sky. In the right orientation, you see the African coast back there. And so at this point, okay, sorry. When I send these images to the group, Clive, who, as some of you may know, he's a really keen birder. He wants to have his birds having an important role in the, and in this case there's good reason, because beached marine mammals would clearly attract all sorts of scavengers beyond Neanderthals, and you would have a strange mixture of marine and land scavengers. So Clive say, okay, why not doing something striking like having seagulls and vultures in the same scene? So, okay, I brought the black cinereous vulture in the background, and some Egyptian vulture here, like waiting for their turn to share in the carrion. And okay, so this is the final version, and sometimes you cannot help bring some sense of humor to the scene. So. In classic scenes, especially these Maternus, beautiful paintings, everything has a reason to be where it is, and every hominid is doing something useful, like in the process of defleshing a carcass. This one is like transporting a rib cage. The other one is cutting But, when you work with your hands, you get used to the fact that many people just unlook, and many of them give indications. They have opinions. I think you should do it like this, and so it's like I don't want to be too ironic, but and another piece of humor here is that like the old masters, which I don't pretend to be, I made a self-portrait there. I Neanderthalized myself, so with some luck, some of you will recognize me there. And I also, I don't know if my colleague may be seeing the live stream now, but I also made a portrait of a colleague of mine who is a great anatomist, and he's always doing the dissections of big cats and primates for me. So I made this little, tribute. I don't know how happy he will be, but anyway. This other scene is the most environmental one, where we wanted to show an overall view of not only the rock, but all these miles of additional land that would be there because of the low sea level. You had all these miles of continental shelf emerged back there. So they took me in the boat to a place roughly above where the Neanderthals would be, using some rocky outcrops and maybe hunting around some fresh water holes there. And but I wasn't too sure what to put in here. There were many ideas. But for one thing, I wanted to have some of the main mammal species that the Neanderthals could be using. And so I sent this preliminary version, and I think it was mostly Geraldine, who is the most geographically and topographically oriented mind in the team. She said, sorry, you got the wrong orientation. If you see the rock like this, you are not on top of the kopjes and the water holes. So okay, let's move a few miles, and okay. So I still kept my sky. I love that sky from that boat ride. And so I sent this version with our two Neanderthals, like looking hopefully to some possible ungulate prey. And so there were several problems. But one of the main was that I had more or less willingly ignored a previous suggestion by Clive to have our raptors here very involved. And this is actually a very adventurous idea, which now I love, which is, why wouldn't, I don't want to go into too much detail into what they are going to tell you in the afternoon, but why wouldn't they, the Neanderthals, actually bait the raptors, or just wait around some convenient carrion, because there is very good evidence that they were using the raptor feathers for decoration. So, okay, let's have our deer carcass here, some vultures already, and impressive golden eagle coming. So I have to make room, moving. This is one of the advantages of working digitally, because I have many layers, so I can move around my animals, make room for new characters in the story. If I were working in oils, this would be unthinkable. So, okay, in the meantime, I also had inadvertently imported a feature from the modern rock, which is this thing here, which apparently is a quarry. So I had to delete it. You look here. Now you see it. Now you don't. It's that kind of things. It's so good that oh, sorry, that there are many eyes in the team to detect this kind of errors. And so the eagle was not still prominent enough for Clive's liking. So come on, it's the golden eagle. And me, I am also an amateur wildlife photographer, and when you see a golden eagle, it's like, wow. So, okay, let's give it some more prominent room. Okay, so here comes our eagle. And so there are other adjustments which I forgot to mention. Oops, going ahead. Even in this early stage, there were two problems with the landscape, which I didn't notice. And it's Geraldine's, again, turn to correct me. And one of them was that I had merely translated our view from the boat, but the Neanderthals were many meters down below, so the perspective would be slightly different. And the other thing is that I had envisioned all the area from the waterhole back to the rock as a flat area, but the evidence points to really big dunes, sand dunes. So I had to incorporate that. Now you see the dunes. Now the position of the rock relative to us is different. So another of the scenes shows our Neanderthals appropriating an ibex carcass from a leopard. And again, one of the striking things here has to do with birds, because in that area called the Ibex Cave, there is evidence for gannets being there, maybe doing their nesting colonies. So in these early sketches, you see some duck-like shapes back in the cliff. So those would be the gannet nests. And okay, you see this is more of an advanced version where some of the Neanderthals are carrying stones. I think that with their spears, their stones, and even just their physical strength, 3 adult Neanderthals were more than enough to have a leopard, abandoning his prey. So these are very preliminary views, which I haven't shown even to the team, because I'm normally ashamed of this. But I thought it would be funny for you to see, this more it's the guts of the process, with some photographs of modern vegetation from the area, which I did during the field trips. So with the hours, I overpaint with the digital tablet, so I tried to make a more uniform texture and thing. And then, again, I had Geraldine saying, sorry, but the transition from this incline to the cliff should be more gradual, because the dunes were actually, they were there. So I included all this more evidence of the sand dune. So this is a really striking image. And, well, it is speculative, but it is based strictly on the evidence. So I think we all fell in love with this idea of having the Neanderthal, like not only enjoying the decoration, the ornament, but also of seeing him or herself for a moment like a raptor who could fly. I think we must have been envious of birds' flight at least since we left the trees. It's like, to have to live in the flat ground. It's a limitation. So, okay, this is one of the earlier full-color versions. And here you have Geraldine's indications for a total change of the coastline position. Well, no problem with that for me. And then, in the meantime, I incorporated other changes. Clive suggested that we needed to have the hands of the Neanderthal showing through to show that he was really supporting those wings. It was not a surgery that would allow it to actually fly. No, it's just make-believe. So, and also, in the final version, I incorporated that evidence of the sand dunes going in parallel to the coastline into the distance. Finally, engraving for posterity. This would be like the first line in the famous engraving in the rocky ground floor of Gorham's cave. And again, you know, it's been so good for me to be involved with this team, because I think we are all really nature lovers, and we all have our weakness for first-hand observations of wildlife. So we wouldn't miss the chance of showing the spot hyena coming to investigate, and even of just conceiving of a possible tolerance. Because generally we think of the fireplace as our defense against wildlife. We will keep the carnivores at bay. But one thing you see when you spend some time doing camp life out in Africa is that it's not so much the fire that keeps the carnivores at bay, it's our behavior. So I have actually had the remains of our dinner in camp beside the fire, and the spot hyenas come. They don't mind the fire if they know that there will come no harm from it. So we should discard this idea. Fire is the ultimate terror for animals. Animals are clever, and they learn. So there is this place in Ethiopia where the locals actually feed the hyenas at night. So one way to discard some of these preconceptions about our relationship with predators would be this scene showing some tolerance, where mutual curiosity could, there are plenty of hyena coprolites in Gorhams. So why not? Why couldn't we be, or our Neanderthal relatives, be looking eye to eye to the hyenas? Also, again, I wanted to introduce this advisor role in the scene, and of course, with the use of fire, other possibilities come into the scene, like why not smoking the birds? And this allowed us to bring in a couple of spectacular giant auks. So we try to bring in as much evidence as possible, rather than just and only concentrate on the engraving, which is a potent image enough. So, final thoughts. Is the present a model for the past? And is the past a model for the present? I mean, when we have seen how our preconceptions can have such a big influence on the images we create, we mustn't forget that the images we create also tend to perpetuate the preconceptions if we are not careful, and even if we are. So often in paleontological art, especially in people working with dinosaurs, people say, you have to be creative. Don't use the present as a model for the past. So let's paint the dinosaurs in many bright colors. Why not? Why not? And, I'm more conservative in a way. I need a good reason to have a dinosaur very brightly colored. And I need a good reason to create any striking image, because just the pleasure of challenging is not enough. So in these 5 images, I think we have been rather challenging. I suppose we will be criticized, but there are so many good reasons to do what we did. We are working from the evidence. So we are using the present as a model for the past all the time. So in terms of anatomy, in terms of biology, if you have the fossil record in one box and modern biodiversity on another box. It is obvious that you cannot work only from you have on the fossil record box. You need the present. You absolutely need it. But then, is the past a model for the present? In many ways it is, but there is a perverse way, which I have noticed especially when working in paleoanthropology, reconstruction. And, you know, it's nowadays it is a temptation to be always politically correct. And I have been criticized by feminist thinkers, like if I am projecting just by following the instructions of my colleagues, like roles, like you see, the Neanderthal hunter, people would say, why wouldn't it be the women hunting? I said, sorry, I don't know. I don't know, but my advisors are telling me, okay, there are these and those other reasons to think that just like modern hunters and gatherers have this. And one thing is we don't know, but the other important thing is why we should have women hunting in our reconstructions. And the reason is that it's like the myth of the good savage. It's like we want them to be good because we use them as a model, because what is natural is good. So if we are going to use the Neanderthals as a role model, they had to be perfect already. They had to be, you know, fair, equitative, and everything. And sorry, maybe they weren't. Because the reason why we have to be equal is because we think it's the right thing to do, not because the Neanderthals did it. So I tend to rebel when I'm told this, no, they have to be equal. Sorry, go back in time and tell them to be equal. And tell us to be equal. That will be more useful because we can learn, hopefully. But we don't know how they were, but certainly they weren't perfect, just as we weren't. So as a final sentence, I think that are we free from cultural preconceptions compared to our... Certainly not. Certainly not. All I can hope is that attention to detail and incorporation of more and more data will somehow prevent our reconstructions from aging too early. So thank you very much.